Wonderful. Thank you so much and welcome back. My name is Susan Coughtrie. I'm Executive Director of the Foreign Policy Centre, which is one of the forum's co-organisers. And we're really delighted to be starting day 2 with Dame Emily Thornberry MP, who has been the MP for Islington South and Finsbury since 2005. So while it is my pleasure to welcome you to City University, I feel like I'm welcoming you to your own patch, so to speak. And I know you have a long-standing relationship with City, so we're really pleased to have you here. Emily, you've been the chair of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee since 2024, and before that held various shadow cabinet positions, including shadow foreign secretary. And given where we are, unbelievably, in March 2026, but very particularly in this week, it felt only right, even though we're going to start talking about some of the inquiries that the Foreign Affairs Select Committee is working on that intersects with some of the themes of the forum that we've been having, to ask you about your reflections on what's been happening this week in the Middle East, and particularly your views on Trump's approach to foreign policy interventions, and what it means. It's a big question, what it means for the rule-based order as we sit here today.
Well, look, thank you very much for inviting me. It's lovely to be back. It's a very big question, and the trouble is my answer might take quite a long time. So I think what I'll do is I'll do it in bits, and then if there's something else you want me to ask, to answer, then I'll answer me the next bit. So we're clearly at a moment of huge stress for the world order. We have a President of the United States who has a very different attitude to the rules-based order, to international institutions, to how America should play its part. I think that this is the first time that I can think of where there has been a war started where people haven't even tried to claim that it's in accordance with international law. Look, you know, even Putin said that he was defending himself against the Ukrainians. And that it was therefore in accordance with international law. So we haven't had any attempt by the United States. I mean, possibly by Israel, who said it was a preemptive strike, but the Americans haven't even tried to justify it. And when you hear Donald Trump talking, he does say, well, you know, the only thing that constrains me is my own conscience. So that is very worrying, and the way that international law and international norms work is that it has to be that people agree with it. And actually, therefore, it is incumbent on us, if there is a challenge to international law, to say, no, that's not right. No, you can't take Greenland. You can't just decide you want Greenland and have it. You can't. That's contrary to international law. You can't go into Venezuela and kill and arrest the head of state. That's contrary to international law. You can't attack a country no matter how horrible it is, unless there is agreement by the United Nations, generally, that that's what you should do, or if you're defending yourself. And neither applies to what's happening in Iran. Where this takes us is very difficult to know, but I think that it is important that the rest of us, the rest of the world, stick together, and that we affirm our belief in international norms, on the international institutions, and in international law, saying what we believe is right and what is wrong, and we need to stick together, because this will pass, I hope. And if it doesn't pass, in a way, we will be culpable because we didn't speak up loudly enough. So that's my view on that. What's going to happen next? I have no idea, and nobody does. It is the most unstable part of the world, and a war or an attack on a very large country has happened. It has a large arsenal. I don't believe it's got nuclear weapons yet. I appreciate that it was going to. There was the JCPOA, the agreement between Obama and Iran, which a lot of countries, including Britain, spent years and years and years agreeing, which was an agreement that the Iranians would give up on their nuclear weapon ambitions, and in exchange they would not have sanctions against them. And it sort of worked, until Donald Trump decided that it should have also included missiles. He didn't like the fact that it was Obama's agreement, and it was torn up. And so we then had a period of stasis when, frankly, as far as I can see, the Iranians went back to purifying their nuclear material, their fissile material, to 60%, I think it is, which is certainly a lot more than you need for a nuclear power station, but not enough for a bomb. And sanctions were put on to the Iranian regime. And there have been uprisings in Iran, and thousands of people have been killed. And I think the problem is how do we change a regime like that? And really, the answer is that it has to come from within. But it is very difficult when you have a state like Iran, where it's so deeply ingrained. People need to understand that the state includes all kinds of organizations and people who not only have a security role, but also have a piece of the pie, have a piece of the economy, and it's in their interest to continue for Iran to continue in that way. And so the Iranian regime remains in power because of force, because of corruption, and also because of ideology. And these three things are a very heady combination. I suspect at least half of the Iranian people would much rather live in a different type of country. But it is very difficult. We have learned, have we? Haven't we? If we haven't, we really should have by now, that you can't change a regime from 30,000 feet. We keep trying, we keep resulting in chaos. And if there's one thing worse than a dictatorship, it's complete chaos. The idea of being a mother in Tehran, in a house, when there is chaos, you don't know who's going to come to the door, what they're going to do to you, what they will do to your family or to your daughter, is just, and there is nothing that you can do to defend yourself. It must be absolutely, and we cannot allow that to happen. So it's, you know, it's definitely challenging, but it is important to speak up. And it does not mean any stretch of the imagination that you're an apologist for Iran, far from it, but you are a champion for international law.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. I put you really under the spot there, and that was a fantastic answer. I mean, we're probably in an era of basically seeing things happening very overtly. But one of the inquiries that the Foreign Affairs Select Committee has been looking at the moment is on disinformation diplomacy, which you could potentially argue has been happening for a very long time and hasn't had such a visible presence maybe until more recently. I know the inquiry is still ongoing and you're still hearing evidence, but perhaps you could give us some sort of insights or kind of key takeaways of the evidence you've heard so far.
So I'm not tempted, I know some people are and want to tempt me, into looking backwards into whether or not there has been malign influence in countries, Britain including. There is continuing always a debate about what influence there may have been over Brexit. But I kind of feel that what you can't tell the British public or any public was that they were influenced by people lying to them or by a malign influence from abroad. Once they have been influenced and they've made up their mind, really, it's not worth it to try to get involved in that. I think what's important is that we look to the future. And the reason that we began this inquiry, in fact, was it came from we have a weekly meeting with ambassadors in the Foreign Affairs Committee. It's sort of random. As ambassadors say they want to come and see us, we put them on a list and we see someone every week, which is quite good because we have a sort of structured system of inquiries and this, that, and the other. But actually seeing ambassadors just coming in and just saying, yeah, please tell us about whatever country it is, because we don't necessarily know anything. And I mean, people are terribly generous, and will tell us about Thailand, let's say. We just don't know, the political system or how politics works within Thailand or its relation, as for example. Anyway, the German ambassador. So we met the German ambassador who talked to me about the elections that they were having coming up and the way in which there were so many different state and non-state actors trying to take a chunk out of their democracy, trying to influence their democracy and trying particularly to promote the far right. And it made me pause and think about it, and I was really quite shocked to hear the extent to which it was happening, because quite often, I think I'd fallen into the trap, which I think, to be fair, I think a lot of people do, which is thinking that, like, Russian influence, for example, really only happens, you know, on the border of Russia, and it's a country's sort of quite a long way away that people don't necessarily know a lot about. But to hear, you know, this major democracy in the center of Europe, and people trying to influence that, and therefore trying to influence the EU. And then you kind of began thinking about, you know, the stresses that France is under, and, you know, and the sort of the way in which it's... Anyway, so we set off an inquiry into disinformation, just to look at what was happening, how extensive it was. And we looked at Europe, particularly, and a number of countries in Europe. The most extreme examples, I'm sure people know, is Romania, where they had to call off a presidential election because of the way in which the TikTok algorithm was being abused, but also how influencers were being paid to promote a particular candidate who was a total unknown, and then within 3 or 4 weeks, suddenly from nowhere, was coming second in the presidential election. So the courts had a hearing about it, decided this was influence from Russia, found evidence that it was, called off the election, had to have a recount, or had to call the election again. And then immediately thereafter, Moldova, which is like a, I hope they don't mind me calling it this, but it's sort of a little bit like a little sister of Romania, had elections itself. And again, and they're right on the border with Ukraine. And the Russians had a big interest in the Moldovans having a referendum for it to go the Russian way, rather than to have a referendum saying that they wanted to go into Europe, having a presidential election again, trying to kind of continue to pull Moldova back into Russia, into the Russian sphere, rather than go into Europe. And the British had a large part to play in defending the Moldovan democracy. In a lot of stuff that I can't repeat, but it was amazing. I mean, amazing, the work that was done. And it's a very small country, and it's won its election. So you then look at those patterns, and you see them, you know, happening across Europe. And we also heard about things that were happening, like, for example, in Brazil, where X wouldn't have any presence in Brazil, so that if they broke the law, in Brazilian law, they couldn't prosecute anybody. So in the end, Brazil said, well, unless you have someone from X in Brazil that we can prosecute if you don't behave, we're going to close down X. And they had a sort of standoff, and eventually now X has a presence in Brazil. I must say, X's presence in the UK is interesting. There's one person who's their representative, who's a living, breathing person, but she's so living and breathing, she's on maternity leave. So they have that, and then there's somebody who's quite clearly not a person but a bot. And then there's somebody in America. That's X's presence in the UK. So you want to regulate X, anyway, I digress. So we looked at a kind of a number of different countries, and I was so surprised at how extensive it was. National, you know, countries like Iran, America, you know, individuals within America, non-state actors, but then also China and Russia. We found one thing. We found that we then started looking at the UK, because a lot of the patterns we thought, actually, recognize a lot of this stuff is happening in the UK. And it's silly, in a way, for us to find out what's going on across the world and not apply those lessons to the UK, because our democracy is vulnerable, and I think there's a level of complacency in the UK, a feeling that, well, we're the birthplace of democracy, and we're robust, and we can stand up to... Actually, I really worry that we can't. I am the MP for Finsbury. Many years ago, many years ago, the Chartist petition, which of 3 million people signing a petition wanting universal male suffrage, right? Really, like, birthplace of that, when we got real democracy. That was the MP for Finsbury. I'm the MP for Finsbury. I really don't want to be the MP for Finsbury that oversees the dying of our democracy by disinformation, by malign foreign influence, trying to undermine us. And I'm very concerned about it. So we have started to make clear to the government, and we will make clear to the government, the trends that we've seen internationally, concerns that we see it only in small degree in the UK, but what we learned in Romania was that it can blow up very, very quickly if an election is called. It may happen in the local elections, it may not happen. They may keep their powder dry, and they may wait until there's a general election. But we should not allow ourselves to be so vulnerable. We must make sure that we protect ourselves. One last thing. So the problem is the way in which the algorithms are used. And so you can post something, and if you post something, it may not be true, it may be true. I think actually the way to look at it is this: why should that post have so many eyeballs on it? Does it get all those eyeballs naturally, or is the algorithm being manipulated by way of bots, by way of the preference of the owner, whatever it is, to promote that post much more than it ought to get in order to make sure that you have maximum impact? That needs to be regulated. But the trouble is that that's the very last thing that the social media companies want to happen. And that's the challenge. There were, and we know this, I think it's because the Secret Service discovered it, in the summer, 1,300 Scottish nationalist bots, or Scottish nationalists, stopped posting. And it coincided with the time when there was the 12-day war in Iran, when the internet broke down. And then after the internet came up again, for a few weeks they were talking about how wonderful the Supreme Leader was. And then they went back to Scottish nationalism again. And then again, during this, the bots have, they've stopped again. There are 1,300 Scottish nationalists in Iran. Extraordinary. And when you look at their profiles, they're not like little egg cups. They're not like the obvious, bots, where, the profile is nothing, they don't have any friends and relations, it's kind of none of their friends, no real people seem to be following them. They're obviously bots. These are much more sophisticated bots. Some of them quite, I was looking at some of them, the man with his shirt off, wearing a kilt, but it was a bot. And all of these are, and why are the Iranians so interested in this? Because they want to undermine our democracy, because they want to divide our country. We have to make sure that we make it clearer to the public this is what happens. On Reddit, there were, a few years ago, just a few hundred posts on Reddit that said that London was dangerous and violent, those 3 words. And then if you look at it, last year, there were hundreds of thousands of posts on Reddit, because it's a campaign to undermine our city and our city's standing in the world. What are we doing about this? Nothing.
Well, hopefully the report, when is the report coming out? Do we have a timeline for that?
We've got a hearing with the social media companies
so you'll
next
be giving
week.
Them
So this is how I've discovered that there wasn't anybody in X at all in the UK working at the moment. I was going to put a big X on a seat and empty chair them, but we've got somebody online who's going to speak.
From the US? Or?
Yeah, from the US.
Okay.
So we've got I think 3 of the social media companies are coming, and we're going to ask them about the algorithms, and we're going to ask them about how do we have to rely on our Secret Service to identify this, or wouldn't it be easier if you kind of played ball? And I think to a certain extent, we are at a really important moment when it comes to social media companies, because I think, given what happened with Grok, given the work that's being done to protect children, I think, at last the British establishment is starting to think, actually, it is time to kind of start taking on social media companies, and I want to pile in behind that when it comes to foreign influence. I think now is the time for them to start being a bit more upfront, and a bit more honest with us. I mean, I know that their model is to get as many eyeballs and as many posts as possible, so that's what the problem is. The financial incentive is to ignore this, but there should be a higher incentive, and if they don't understand it, then we need to make sure that we stop them.
Well, is that going to be an open evidence session? Will people be able
to it's going to be an open evidence session.
I think people will be looking forward to watching you give them what's for. I'm conscious of time, and actually there's so many inquiries that you're working on at the moment, and there's a lot going on in the world. But I did, and maybe given that we've just got a few minutes left, I might just do a couple of maybe quick fire things. No. On soft power, I mean, I know you've got the inquiry, and that is a big thing for you as well. You've been a huge advocate of the BBC World Service in particular. I'm just concerned at where we are in the world today and what we've already discussed. Are we too late, really, to be deploying soft power in the way that we want to? Are we in the position, given the BBC World Service still is unclear about its funding moving forward? Where are we going to be able to?
So the other side
have
of the
that
coin
influence?
to disinformation is to put out some truth.
Yeah.
And we are in this unique position of having the badge of the BBC, which is universally believed as speaking the truth. So why isn't our gift to the world the BBC World Service? Why aren't we tripling its funding? I mean, seriously, not just like, oh, should we keep up with funding as before? No, actually, it should be, I think, a major priority for this country to be, and it promotes British values, but it also helps people. The bit of the BBC that is growing fastest is TikTok in the countries around China. So, which is really interesting, which speaks to, teenagers in the Philippines really desperate to know what the truth is. And not being able to find it, and finding it on TikTok through the BBC. I mean, that speaks to the hunger that people have. And we should fulfill that. We should be doing much more. And particularly if, with the cutbacks that we're making on aid in places like Africa, it's felt that we don't even have a presence in many of these countries. So let's at least have a really good presence when it comes to helping people be able to kind of work out what's going on in this complicated and frightening world.
Absolutely. Okay, I said quick fire, so I'm going to go to
That's a quick fire answer.
That was great. I'm going to try and even quicker fire on the last two questions. We've had quite a lot of panel discussions yesterday about issues including transnational oppression and slaps, which is an issue quite close to my heart as a co-founder of the UK Anti-Slap Coalition. So I can't let you go without asking what you think the government's sort of position. Are they doing enough on TNR? Are they doing enough on slaps? Obviously, you know what my answer would be on both of those, but I'm keen to hear yours.
I think on transnational repression, I think that there's a large number of trials coming up, particularly of Iranians, and the attempts on the lives of Iranians, which I think is, I know that a lot of work has been done on that. I don't think there's anything can be discussed at the moment, but I think, credit where credit is due, actually, the amount of work that's been done there. And of course, we had a large number of Iranians in London because it was much safer than many of the other countries, and then they found themselves being attacked, and I'm really glad to see that it's stepped up. It is terrifying, the idea that journalists feel that their very lives are at risk in a country like Britain, and obviously, whilst anyone continues to feel and to be intimidated, we're not doing enough. And I don't know what the government's doing on slaps, to be honest.
I don't think any of us
No.
do. I think that's part of the problem, but we're very much hoping there might be some news before May when the next King's Speech is happening.
Yeah.
I'm really sorry to say that we're kind of coming out of time, but it's been a pleasure having you, and I hope you'll consider coming to the next one, and maybe we can do it for an hour, because I think there's loads to talk about, and I'm sure many of your inquiries will have come to
Yeah, sorry, I've got to get to a surgery. So.
But I hope you'll all join me in thanking Dame Emily Thornberry for her time and for her insights.